Daisy.
And I'm Terri.
And this is the Monday Mindset Podcast,
where we share things of interest to us and hopefully to you.
So let's get started with episode number 174. And this week it is Terri's turn to share. Terri, what have you got for us?
Well, Daisy, I listened to an episode today that I know is somewhat of a repeat. I don't think this particular episode is a repeat, but if it is, I apologize. I just think that this is a topic that we can't possibly discuss often enough. And that is the Harvard happiness study. So the episode that I'm sharing with you today, Daisy, is from the Jordan Harbinger show, and it is Robert Waldinger, Unlocking the Science of Happiness. And the guest on this episode is Robert Waldinger, who is part of that Harvard study. And a couple of the things that fascinated me about this study is just the idea that this is the longest study of the same lives, really, kind of in history. Started in 1938. So it's been going on for over 80 some years, which is a really long time. And also their methods of collecting data have obviously improved since 1938. But there are some longer studies that are really just kind of surveys and things that don't really gather much information. But this one, they're doing physical exams, they've done blood tests, they've done all kinds of things, biometric feedback, and many different things. So really what they're studying is adult lifespan development. And the study started with 724 people. 2/3 of those were kids from Boston's poorest neighborhoods and troubled families. And then 1/3 were Harvard sophomores. Now, I have to remember this was 1938. I doubt that even that selection process would pass at this point because it's not completely a representative sample. Obviously, 1938, Harvard sophomores were white men. And so that limits part of the diversity of this sample, but the other 2/3 being from a more diverse population, but even so, not representative of our population, at least the population in the US now. And those Harvard sophomores were chosen because they were predicted to be examples of having successfully transitioned from childhood to young adult. So if we're looking at these kids and we're looking at people who've kind of made that transition, we just kind of round out the sample again. But followed for many, many years, and as I said, doing a lot of different types of data collection. And Robert Waldinger said one of the reasons that this study has been so useful is that they study the big subjects over and over. They don't just keep trying to find new information, they keep replicating and using different methods to replicate things and learn more. So, for example, 2 of the bigger subjects that they've studied over and over again, mental health and physical health. So the host of the podcast, Jordan Harbinger, brought up the idea that obviously over these past 80 some years, lots of research technology has changed. And he said, I hear you're even collecting brains. And Robert Waldinger said, yes, some people have donated their brains for us to study. And one of the ways that this is so useful is they can look at the brain now after this person died, but they know their life history. They know what was going on at 19. They know what the life stressors were. So particularly in brains that are disease-free, they can really just explore how these life circumstances may show up in the brain. So it's really interesting getting even deeper in what they can study, which is great. So some of you may remember we've talked about this study before, and the book is out, and so I wanted to talk just a little bit about that. But basically, the summary comes down to happiness is almost all about relationships. In 2015, Robert Waldinger did a TED Talk, and one of the biggest things he shared in that, and this was such a widely viewed TED Talk, is that people who are happiest and live the longest are ones with quality relationships. When quality relationships are lacking, lifespan is shorter and overall scores of happiness are lower. One of the positive things that he said about this is that there's no time limit. It's never too late. If you're 65, it's not too late to work on relationships. He talked about people in the study who at age 85 got married, found love. It's never too late. And I think that's important for everyone to recognize. Another thing he highlighted from the study is that when people have relationships, have someone available to them, and let's say they're being treated medically, they experience less physical pain, less depression, and it might be kind of obvious why you might experience less depression when you have quality relationships, but people might be wondering, how is it that less physical pain, and how do they even know this? One of the things that they've done is they can do imaging of the brain while someone is undergoing a kind of painful procedure. And the pain level, not only that the person reports, but what they can see lighting up in the brain in response to how much pain they're experiencing, that is actually less when the person has someone in the room with them, let's say a close friend, a spouse, a sibling, and even less pain when they're touching that person. So having someone in that room with you holding your hand can actually help mitigate how much physical pain you experience. I think that is just fascinating. And of course, a little bit of trivia in there that they are studying and he did not have all conclusive information about, but as you and I know, petting animals also conveys some of this benefit of protecting you from stress and emotional pain. So just another vote for our pets.
Yeah, it's another thing that's been studied quite extensively, hasn't it?
Mm-hmm. So one of the things he talked about that interferes for people is comparison. And I know this is talked about more and more. We see this coming up. And unfortunately, so many of us are now getting a lot of our information and things with social media involved. And media definitely tries to incite FOMO, fear of missing out, so that you'll buy their stuff, you'll do the activities, whatever, and comparison to get us hooked. So kind of recognizing this is really intentional and things that we may want to be careful about. Robert Waldinger is a psychiatrist, and he talks about, especially with his younger patients, he works to get them off of social media or using it less. And once they do that, he sees that their overall level of happiness, their emotional pain decreases, and overall levels of happiness increase just by coming off social media. They then talked about money and happiness because, some people believe that they'll be happier if they have more money. And then there are statements about, money cannot buy you happiness. And there is somewhat a connection with money and happiness, but it's not quite as clear or direct as what people may wish. Old information shared that $75,000, this is in the US, and this was in 2017, so obviously that's changed a bit, but they found that $75,000 was kind of the key, and people who earned at least $75,000, they reported higher levels of happiness. But if you dig into why is that, researchers really believe it's because they reached a level of being able to provide for their basic needs. Like if you don't have enough food, if you don't have proper shelter, proper health care, happiness is much harder. And so they found that that cap was mostly based on were their basic needs being met. And there were different researchers on this. And so he talked about two specifically. One who said it stopped at this. It couldn't go, your happiness level couldn't go higher based on money. And another one who believed it could. And those two created a collaboration to do research because they both had different beliefs. And so they did a study of all of the research that had been done. And they really found that it can increase over the 75,000, that people can continue to become happier with more money. But what they cautioned against is purposely believing that you will be happier if you make more money.
Yeah.
There's a difference. It just happens to be I can do more things with more money. I can give away more money. I can help more people. But when someone is just sitting there saying, I will be happier when I make 125 or 150 or $1 million, the research really pans out that they aren't any happier. So it's not just a matter of more money, more happiness. And related to that, they said that people are happier when they are generous. And they described something that they called the giving pledge, I don't know if it was millionaires or billionaires, that they have kind of a challenge that they sign up for, basically that to give away half of what they have while they're alive. And they actually find that those that are giving, being generous in this way, actually are happier. It's not about how much money, but obviously having extra money may make giving it away or sponsoring others or groups even easier. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, and I thought what you were saying about happiness not increasing over that basic needs amount. And I think a lot of people say, oh yeah, money doesn't bring happiness when they haven't experienced being below a threshold. And that really, there is a massive impact. But yeah, not having a certain financial goal, but probably also just these, they're not exactly arbitrary, but a bigger house or a better car or something that's one step away from being a particular financial goal, but it's just a thing. But you also mentioned there could be an increase in happiness because it enabled you to do more things, which is tied usually with some kind of connection. So it's an experience that you're probably sharing with other people. So, going up in stages, having that bit more that means, well, that might mean that I can take that much more of a block of time off to go somewhere really nice with my family. And so you can see how that would increase it a lot more rather than, just having the latest Jaguar or whatever it is.
That's right. Which always fascinates me about research in general, because I know that they try to rule out which things are influencing it, but you can't completely. It's not just the fact that I have more money that might be making me happier. It's the fact that having that money affords me more time to connect with people.
What it enables you to do, yeah.
Hobbies that, require some financial needs. It may be creating happiness on a different level, but it's not about the actual money.
Yeah, and quite often what it enables you to do, like someone could say, yeah, I get so much a sense of fulfillment from volunteering at a local charity of some kind. But yeah, you're going to struggle to do with that if you're working all the hours just to meet your basic needs. So sometimes, earning more could afford you maybe more time to be able to do things that aren't necessarily involved with money, but they're involved in enrichment exercises. So you can, you really can see how there's definitely a level of money that you have to get to. Not have to get to. I mean, they've done studies where there's this, I remember reading an article about a guy somewhere, I can't remember where it was. I have a feeling it was India, but I could be wrong. And who was on, a really, really low salary and worked long hours, something like a tuk-tuk driver, I think, but got a great satisfaction actually in his work and bringing money home for his family. But again, that compared to somebody who had less and was able to just get to those basic needs. It is about covering the basic needs that people need to be reasonably happy.
That's right. I see here in my notes something that kind of ties back in, but I just wanted to make sure to include this about the concept of comparison and the reality. We've been doing this for, very long time. I remember as a kid, magazines. You looked at magazines and you compared yourself. And one of the things that Robert Waldinger said about comparison is the more that we do this, the less happy we tend to be. And so I think that is an important takeaway from this study and this podcast episode is if you catch yourself comparing a lot or you're doing this, that change, and I'm not saying it would be easy, but to get out of that habit of comparing yourself can really change levels of happiness. And interestingly, even when the comparison is in your favor, meaning you do better on this than other people, you've earned more, you've achieved more, even comparing the fact that you did better than others tends to leave us feeling more empty and less happy. So I really encourage everyone to really think about where in their kind of experience does comparison lie and to really work on getting that out of there. They then talked about a happiness set point, and I thought this was pretty interesting. A researcher that Robert Waldinger has studied, she reports that 40% of our happiness is genetic.
Really? Wow.
Which surprised me. 10% is based on our current circumstances. So, we talk about, oh, that person's so lucky they've got this going on, or this person, oh, they live in a horrible situation. That only contributes 10%. So this means 50% of our happiness, basically, is what he called movable, or stuff that we can change or affect, do something about. 50%.
Wow. That's
quite a bit. And so really looking at taking action on the things that can create more happiness. And again, the biggest lesson from this study so far is about relationships. One of the things he said, and I think I may have shared this before, but the lack of quality relationship, the ties that has to our overall happiness and well-being is equal to being obese or to smoking cigarettes. And what they're digging into is really learning more about what of these relational things and life stressors, how those affect us physiologically, like smoking cigarettes or like being obese, and how having relationships can help mitigate that. An example of that, information on marriage and relationships, that status was even more predictive of physical health than was cholesterol levels. So, of course, when we think about cardiology, everyone's like, okay, let's look at the lipids. Let's look at all those cholesterol levels. Marriage and relationship status is even more predictive of physical health than that cholesterol level. So instead of putting everyone on a statin, we need more social opportunities, better social skills. All right. They talked about some things that they found in the study about the differences. And one example that I thought was pretty interesting is stress and wound healing. So they actually inflict a small wound and then they monitor the healing of that wound. And they had two groups of people. One group were taking care of a relative with dementia. They referred to them as demented relatives, and I thought that's a whole other podcast episode. But they were taking care of a relative with dementia. And compared to the group that was not, they took 39 days longer to heal that wound.
Wow.
Not a couple days. That would be my prediction. Like, okay, yeah, it took a little longer. No, 39 more days.
Wow.
So that's the level of, stress and what that can do for healing and obviously then If relationships help mitigate stress, that's, going to have I borrow this from you, I think, a knock-on effect of helping with health markers. Important lesson he said is that childhood isn't destiny. We look at 2/3 of the study sample were kids in really difficult situations, and many of them have been very happy, healthy, productive lives. So childhood is not destiny. And what they really see makes a big difference is if you find healthy people and create healthy relationships. And so he really encouraged, it can make such a difference if your patterns from childhood were, you're drawn to this type of rebel or something, that you may need to take extra time getting to know someone to make sure that you're not just replicating an old unhealthy pattern for you. They talked a little bit about work-life boundaries, because one of the things that, of course, when we go back to meeting basic needs and wanting to earn money, potentially thinking that's going to lead to happiness, is that many people work too much and talk about like having work friends or friends at work. It's okay. He said, look, you spend your day at work with these people and then you go home and they're your friends and you spend time with them, that's fine. The important thing is stop working, because that's what really tends to interfere. And then they brought up the social media meme that basically says the only people who are going to, basically on your deathbed, the only people who are going to remember that you worked as much as you did are your kids.
Yeah.
And that's a really powerful perspective taking for people.
But again, it's still that basic need threshold, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of, to some people would say, well, yeah, that's a luxury to be able to decide what that balance is.
That's right. And go back to your example, even though that person may not have been earning much money or may not have been earning a reputation with work, the satisfaction that they experienced doing the work that they do, providing for their family, that can make a difference. How much you value it versus do you feel stuck in it?
I seem to remember there might have also been an element, which is something we've talked about as well, is quality of time sometimes coming over quantity of time. So if there's not a quantity of time available, but there's a quality of the time that you do spend. So for people in a position who are working long hours and are maybe tired when they come home in the evening, but spending that, and I could be remembering this wrong, but something comes to mind of that first, however long it was, when he first got home before he was really tired. That was the quality moment that he spent with his kids. And, it doesn't necessarily need to be that long. Rangan Chatterjee talks about the 5-15 minutes he has his little tea ceremony with his wife every day, where they sit down and they take a few minutes, to drink a cup of tea and have a conversation about their day, a connection, a point of connection. It doesn't always necessarily need to be a massive chunk of time, but it's that time that everyone knows is theirs, knows is reliable, knows is dedicated quality time.
That's right. The other thing that you just, I think, touched on in some ways that's really important, it's not always the big sweeping things, it's the nuances of these details, the quality of time versus the amount of time. And oftentimes people might think quality of relationships, meaning I have to focus all of my energy on these really big, important relationships. And the research actually shows creating small ties. I can't remember the word he used in his actual writing about it, but basically unimportant ones actually have a ton of impact. So, for example, every time he's in an Uber, he talks to the driver and he gets some about their life story. Talking to the barista at the coffee shop, talking to other customers while you're standing in line at a shop or at a show or something. That these people that you may never even see again, But having that social interaction, that is actually a huge part of it. So sometimes people think, oh, well, I'm not in a romantic relationship, or I don't have a best friend, so I'm going to miss out on this. Those small interpersonal connections throughout the day actually achieve the same. So I think that's really important. And interestingly, often these end up being where other connections come in. You know, if you're married to someone, you don't get a lot of job opportunities for them or new friendship opportunities, but it's those smaller relationships throughout your day. And you might say to someone, yeah, I'm looking at doing some other work. And they're like, oh, well, I've got this friend who can, that these often kind of spark new areas for us in life. So really important. They talked about the importance of, when you're going through a situation, the importance of kind of zooming out to get the perspective of the bigger picture. Because oftentimes as something's happening in the moment, we're so kind of flooded by all of the emotions and everything of right now, versus if we can zoom out and recognize, 3 months from now, I'm going to hardly remember that this happened. Here's what I want to take forward from it. So zooming out, they talked about as important. And this goes back to the money thing a little bit for some people, but if you are able to do stuff that you love, you tend to be happier. And it doesn't have to be money driven, but obviously, as you talked about, money can be the thing that affords people the freedom in their schedule to do some things that they love. But it may also mean doing something in your day that you love. Even if I don't like the task of my job, doing something at my job that I love. Helping that one person that really, is kind of an underdog. Even though I don't love the task I'm doing, I may really feel good about doing that. So finding ways to do stuff that you love. There was a brief article about the book that they wrote, not Jordan Harbinger, but Robert Waldinger and his fellow researcher. And it's called The Good Life. And this is Lessons from the World's Longest Scientific Study of Happiness. And I just wanted to share an example of something this person pulled from it. And it's talking about those social relationships. And the suggestion from the book was to let people know how much they matter to you. And she quoted this because this was the one strategy that stood out the most to her in reading his book. Think about someone, just one person, who is important to you. Think about what they mean to you, what they've done for you in your life. Where would you be without them? Who would you be? Now think about what you would thank them for if you thought you would never see them again. At this moment, right now, turn to them, call them, tell them. And I think this is great. I have not read this book, but I like that they are giving some real practical steps to take to experience the benefits of these things. And so this is about really communicating that quality of connection and helping someone else know their value to you and for you to be reminded of their value to you. So I think this may be a great book. I hadn't gotten a chance to look at it yet, but a great book based on the findings of studying happiness very broadly. They've looked at it for so many years and in so many ways. So I really encourage our listeners to dig in and see if there's something that they can take from this.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to try and put into practice, isn't it? It sort of goes along the lines of taking people for granted or feeling taken for granted, feeling like you're not valued, you're not heard in a relationship, and how much damage that does. And the difference it makes when somebody does highlight that actually they do value you. And this could be in a work relationship, it could be in a social relationship, it could be in a marriage, it could be in whatever. But just those reminders often, just reminding that person why you value them. Because you've only got to think of an example of when someone says something like that to you and how it makes you feel.
Yeah.
And conversely, how it makes you feel when nobody ever highlights it. You might be able to imagine, well, I think they value me, but although what their actions are saying to you is that they don't really value you.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think that's a really good tip. And that when you were talking about the little relational things that we have during our day and the importance of those. And I think about, for some reason, there's a local shop that's often a local shop in different parts of the country here called the Co-op. And I haven't experienced all co-ops, but it seems to be a thing. And I don't know if it's something in part of their training or not, or perhaps co-op members of staff are treated well, so they're generally happier, but they're generally friendlier and happier and start up, not a full-blown conversation with you, but genuinely ask you, how are you doing today, or show some kind of interest or spark a little bit of a conversation. And yeah, the difference that you feel, the little impact that it has on your day to go in that example, to go into a shop of some kind and for somebody to smile at you, ask you how you're doing. For one thing, it usually encourages a reciprocation. So, you naturally want to ask how they're doing as well. And there's that little bit of interaction, a little bit of connection. To the person who, hardly looks at you, looks grumpy, is obviously not having a good time, is obviously not enjoying their job. And what you were saying about finding some pleasure in what you're doing, it seems like it's going to be beneficial every which way you look at it, for the person who's on the receiving end, from the person who's doing that job. It's just something I've noticed in that particular shop. Yeah, people in the Co-op always seem to be super friendly, whereas not necessarily in other shops.
So Daisy, one of the things I thought about when you first said that, and I don't know exactly what that means there, but when I think of a co-op here, where I used to live, there was a co-op in a small neighborhood. And I can imagine everyone there, in my experience, they were friendly and they were helpful. But they were there for a specific reason. They chose to volunteer at a co-op. They chose the values of this organization. They didn't want to be shopping at an impersonal store. They wanted to be able to order specialty products and to have people be able to give them knowledgeable feedback and to have, that investment in it. And so I think this is a great example. It doesn't even have to mean going grocery shopping is great fun, but if I'm doing it at a place that aligns with my values, I'm going to be happier. Versus if I'm going grocery shopping at a store that I hate and I think that they're just out getting me with all of their charges, I'm going to feel less happy. So I think that's a great example. Why are those people working there? Why do they shop there? Well, how does it align with their values? And I think that makes a big difference of how happy they are while they're there, whether it's working or shopping or whatnot.
Yeah, well, interestingly, it's not quite the same as you're describing, but as you were saying that, yeah, there is quite an identity piece with the Co-op. They are quite fixed on certain levels of animal welfare, and for example, they only sell free-range eggs, and that's been going for quite a long time. So they only stock free-range eggs, whereas you go to the bigger supermarkets and they will certainly have barn eggs, but will quite possibly have caged eggs as well. And I noticed a sign in the Co-op last year sometimes that they were working towards even anything that had eggs as an ingredient would also be free range eggs. Now that's probably, I'm assuming anyway, only their products, but it might encompass other brands that they stock. But yes, and I noticed that, and I thought that was great, because that's a cutoff I have for eggs. I will only buy free range eggs. And so it was great that a shop had that same, that same bar level that they refused to go below.
Yeah.
Yeah, as you say, we have discussed this study before, and I do think it's fascinating. And it reminds me a little bit, just this length of time and the fact that they've followed people for the whole of their lives. And it just brought to mind a discussion I was having the other day about the friends that you have from childhood. Any friends that you have that you met when you were in any of those sort of school years, really, but people that you've grown up with and still friends with are completely irreplaceable, because nobody has experienced that with you. You can make friends in adulthood and you can make fantastic friends, but to have friends that you spent childhood years with, especially as you get as old and ancient as we are. But it just something that came to mind when you were talking right back at the beginning about the length of this study, and that is an interest in and of itself.
Unfortunately, I wish, we could do more studies like this that really looked at other, cross sections of populations. I don't know what all of their studies show and what they look at, but even learning more about types of careers or geographic regions and, happiness and health and things. I just think there's so much to be learned by watching how people really live. And they were kind of joking at the end of the podcast that who knows where the future of this research is going to be. They might be able to get you at the beginning of the study, implant a chip, download the data, all kinds of unique things that they'll be able to do into the future. But I think this is a great study and a book that I think I'm going to check out, just because obviously happiness is a topic that has kind of gone throughout my career as a psychologist and now as a coach. I'm just really looking at what helps people in that happiness creating in their life.
And so presumably it's just a study that's just going to carry on going, is it, for the foreseeable future?
I assume until they're out of participants.
Yeah, I mean, is that the kind of the cutoff? Have they been recruiting new people as they go, or is it following just a certain set of people so it does sort of have a finite lifespan, or have they been starting again, as it were, as they've been going?
I don't know. That's a great question. I assumed, and I know we're not supposed to assume, I assumed from different things I heard that was the initial study, right, and that they just keep checking in. But I don't know if they've added and done other things as well.
She'll have to find out.
Yeah. Well, until next week, I will look forward to hearing what you have to share with us, Daisy, and I hope everyone has a great week.
Have a wonderful week.